the city of King's Landing burned, just as it had 17 years ago. But this time, it wasn't a mad king shouting commands or wildfire spreading through tunnels. It was politics, pride, and one man's silence that set the capital on fire. Lord Eddard Stark had stood in the Red Keep, sword at his side, eyes locked with those of Tywin Lannister. They had met privately after the death of King Robert Baratheon. Tywin came not with armies this time, but with power, the quiet kind. Letters had been sent. Ravens had flown. He offered an alliance, subtle yet sharp. Ned Stark, bound by honor, would never make deals with those who slaughtered children. But he was no longer just Warden of the North. He was Hand of the King, protector of the realm, and the realm was falling apart. So he did nothing. He did not warn the city when the Lannister banners began to gather outside its walls. He did not alert the gold cloaks when whispers of betrayal passed from mouth to mouth. He simply waited and watched, and hoped that the truth of Joffrey's parentage would be enough to undo the boy's claim to the throne. It wasn't. Joffrey was crowned within hours of Robert's death. Cersei moved fast, faster than Ned ever expected. The Iron Throne was no longer a seat of power. It was a battlefield, and Ned Stark had lost before he even drew his sword. Tywin Lannister's forces did not ask for entry when they arrived. The gates were opened from within. Littlefinger's betrayal ran deeper than Ned could have imagined, and the gold cloaks turned on the Stark household in an instant. But unlike the real history, where Ned was arrested trying to save his daughters and the realm, this time he had already made his peace with silence. He didn't try to arrest Cersei. He didn't announce Joffrey's illegitimacy. He simply waited, and Tywin rewarded that. The Lannister men stormed the capital, but there was no siege, no fire, no massacre of babies or royal heirs, because the heirs were already Lannisters. Tommen, Myrcella, Joffrey, all in place, all safe, and Ned Stark lived. He was taken into protective custody, a guest in the Tower of the Hand, while the city reorganized itself. Sansa remained betrothed to Joffrey. Arya vanished. Some say Syrio Forel died protecting her. Others whisper she escaped dressed as a boy. Catelyn in Riverrun received no raven, only silence and rumors. Tywin made his son Tyrion Hand of the King, not because he trusted him, but because he needed someone sharp and ruthless in a city full of knives. Cersei ruled through her son, and the realm prepared for the inevitable response from the north. But it never came. Winterfell did not march. Robb Stark was still too young, and his mother too cautious. With no execution of Ned, no death of Robert, and no open rebellion, there was no war yet. Just the sound of swords being sharpened in the dark, yet all was not peaceful. Behind the Red Keep's closed doors, whispers grew louder. Varys spoke less and listened more. Littlefinger plotted with both sides. Renly Baratheon fled the city before the gates closed. And Stanisiva, proud, ever silent, vanished from Dragonstone with a fleet of ships and a red woman whispering of kings and flames. Ned, sitting in his room, wondered if honor had a price. He had avoided bloodshed. He had protected his daughters for now. But every day the city breathed fire and lies, and he began to see that inaction could be as damning as any betrayal. Then, one night, Varys visited him in secret. "You let the lion take the lamb's throne," he said, without smiling. "And you may have kept your head, Lord Stark, but did you lose your soul?" Ned didn't answer, because deep inside, he already knew the truth. King's Landing was quieter than usual, but not calmer. The streets had the stillness of a graveyard after dusk. People whispered instead of speaking. They watched instead of acting. The Iron Throne, draped in Lannister red, sat taller than ever. Joffrey ruled, but it was Cersei's will and Tywin's gold that made the city move. Ned Stark was not a prisoner, not exactly. He still wore his own clothes, still had his sword beside him, and he still received letters from the north, fewer now, and heavily filtered. He could walk the gardens, but not leave the Red Keep. A guest, a hostage, a relic of the last king's honor in a city that had long since forgotten what the word meant. He spent hours staring at the courtyard, watching Seer Meryn train the boy. Princess Tommen smiled with every swing. Joffrey snarled at every correction. Sansa stood nearby like a statue, pale, quiet, trying so hard to be queen already. That haunted him more than anything. There had been a moment brief, painful, where Ned thought to run, to take Sansa, find Arya if she still breathed, and escape through the tunnels Varys once hinted at. But where would they go? And what would happen to the north? To honor, he had made a choice. He had traded action for peace. But now he wondered, peace for whom? Tywin Lannister summoned him 3 days after the last of Robert's body was burned at sea. Not buried, not honored in the sept, cremated. Quietly, quickly. Cersei didn't want to waste the people's tears on a man they barely mourned. The old lion sat on the small council's chair like he owned it. Ned entered, eyes steady. "You served my king," Tywin began, "and you served my family by doing nothing when it mattered most." Ned flinched, slightly. "I served the realm." "No," Tywin corrected him coldly. "You served yourself. And for that, you'll live, but don't mistake survival for loyalty." He slid a parchment forward, a letter, sealed with wax, shaped like a lion's paw. "You will write to your son, Robb Stark. He will not raise banners. He will not send men south. He will accept Joffrey as king, and he will remember that the North still owes debts to the crown." Ned said nothing. "If you don't, Tywin," added Sansa, "will marry Joffrey within the month. And when she fails to give him sons, we'll find someone who can." That night, Ned wrote the letter. He stared at the words for a long time. He told Robb not to march, told him to keep the peace, told him to trust the gods and wait for better times. He didn't sign it with father. He signed it with Lord Eddard Stark. The title felt colder than the quill in his hand. Elsewhere in the realm, chaos stirred. Stannis Baratheon had declared himself king on Dragonstone. His ravens carried black words and red warnings. Joffrey was no true heir. Cersei had broken the laws of gods and men. Most tore up the letters. A few read them twice. In the Riverland, small bands began attacking Lannister supply lines. Walder Frey sent promises to both sides and loyalty to none. The Tullys grew nervous, the Greyjoys silent. And in the north, Robb Stark stood in the great hall of Winterfell, holding his father's words with shaking hands. He didn't believe the letter. He knew his father's voice. And this wasn't it. Meanwhile, in the capital, Sansa began to cry at night, softly, quietly, where no one could hear. Joffrey didn't hit her yet, but he was cruel with his words, mocking her hair, her weight, her walk. He hated weakness, and she was learning how to hide it. Arya, still missing, had become a ghost story among the servants. Some swore she'd been killed. Others claimed she joined a ship headed to Braavos. The truth was darker. She had joined a group of street children who called themselves rats and lived by stealing food from market stalls. She was no one now, no one but a wolf in a city of lions. Varys moved through the halls like smoke. His whispers filled every room, yet no one knew where his loyalty truly lay. He visited Ned once more, his voice softer than before. You played their game, and now, Lord Stark, you're a piece on their board. Ned looked up. Then maybe it's time someone knocked the board over. Snow didn't fall in King's Landing, but Eddard Stark felt the cold in his bones anyway. He had lived through war, marched through storms in the north, but nothing chilled him like this silent city, a place dressed in gold but soaked in rot. His letter had bought him time, bought his daughters more, but at the cost of every belief he ever held. Then came the news from the Riverlands. Tywin Lannister had sent Seer Gregor Clegane the Mountain on a campaign of justice. Villagers burned, peasants were slaughtered. The Tully banners rose in defiance, and Catelyn Stark, refusing to stay quiet, seized Tyrion Lannister on the road and dragged him to the Eyrie for trial. That changed everything. Tywin's fury was instant. His army doubled in days, and war. Drums beat again in the south. Cersei demanded Ned denounce his wife's actions, but he refused. He said nothing. Again, it was becoming his curse. His silence. Joffrey, now swollen with power and cruelty, threatened to have Sansa whipped for her mother's treason. That was when Ned acted. Finally, his voice rang through the throne room like steel. She is a child. Harm her, and I will raise the north with fire. The court froze. Even Cersei's lips parted slightly. Joffrey stared, wide-eyed but amused, not realizing he'd been warned, not threatened. The next day, Ned was quietly moved from his chambers to a tower room with guards. At the door, not a cell, not yet, but the war was no longer waiting. Robb Stark, with the North stirred to anger, began gathering bannermen, the Karstarks, the Umbers, the Mormonts. Even the cautious Lord Rickard Ricewell raised his swords. It wasn't just about Catelyn now. It was about balance. The realm had tilted too far in one direction. Robb received the letter from his father, the one signed Eddard Stark, but by now he had also heard from Maester Luwin of the Riverlands raids, from Catelyn about Tyrion's cunning and Tywin's rage, from ravens carrying news of the mountains. Atrocities. The letter might have come from his father's hand, but it was soaked in Lannister ink. He gathered his lords and gave a speech in the Godswood of Winter. I will not march to start a war, he said, but I will march to end one. They cheered for the king in the north before he ever wore a crown. Back in King's Landing, Varys brought Ned word of Robb's movements, slipping the details. Through the walls like wind through cracks. He's a boy, Varys whispered, but he has the look of you when you were young, when your honor still hurt people instead of protecting them. Ned didn't argue. He knew what he had become. A man trying to stop a flood with his hands tied and his mouth shut. That night, Sansa came to visit him. Her eyes were darker now. The color was draining from her spirit day by day. She had learned to curtsy at the right time, smile on command, lie with grace. They say Robb is marching, she said quietly. Will he come for us? Ned reached through the bars to touch her hand. He'll come for the north, he replied, but I'll do what I must to protect you. She nodded, but didn't believe him. Not entirely. Cersei, now growing paranoid, decided Sansa was too valuable to leave unguarded. She was confined to her rooms, surrounded by scepters and Lannister guards. Arya was still missing, and no bounty had brought her out of hiding. Ned began to think she might have escaped the city entirely. War came to the Riverlands like a red tide. Jaime Lannister led a force against the Tullys. Edmure was captured. Riverrun was surrounded. But then, something unexpected happened. Robb Stark crossed the Twins, and Walder Frey, ever the Snake. Let him the North was in the South now. A host of 20,000 strong, wolves in lion country. The balance was shifting, and for the first time, Tywin Lannister looked worried. In the Tower of the Hand, Ned Stark stood by the window and watched the city burn in candlelight. It wasn't on fire, not yet, but the flames were coming, and he knew, deep down, that he could no longer stay silent. By the time the Raven arrived, at the Red Keep, the streets of King's Landing were already humming with tension. Word had spread. Robb Stark had won a great battle in the Whispering Wood. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer himself, had been taken alive. That changed everything. Tywin, camped at Harrenhal, received the news with a cold fury. He could hide the truth from the realm for a few days, maybe, but not from his family, not from Cersei. She summoned the small council in the middle of the night. Ned, still under guard, was brought in with less ceremony than a cell's word. Cersei was pacing. "Your son has our brother," she snapped. "You think this is honor. You think your silence bought you peace. You've bought nothing but war." Ned stood tall. "I didn't march my banners. You forced the North's hand. You don't get to be righteous now," she hissed. "You gave us nothing, and now you'll pay in full." She turned to Pycelle. "Prepare the wedding. Sansa and Joffrey will marry within 10 days. I want the realm to see unity." Ned's fists clenched. "She's a child." "She's a hostage," Cersei corrected. But Sansa wasn't the girl she had been. The Sansa that cried at court and begged for her father's life was gone. What stood now was someone harder, quieter. She didn't resist the wedding. She didn't speak out. She simply nodded and learned. In the North, Robb received a message. Not from Ned, but from Varys. A secret letter, unsigned, with one line. "The girl will be wed. The old wolf is chained. The game is no longer quiet." That was all Robb needed. He changed his war strategy overnight. Instead of pressing to King's Landing, he turned toward the Lannister forces retreating from the Riverlands. He was going to take Harrenhal or cut off Tywin's retreat and trap him in the west. And now, with Jaime in chains, he had leverage. Back in the Red Keep, Littlefinger moved with more freedom than ever. He knew Ned had lost all his allies. Renly had fled to Highgarden. Stannis was still brooding in Dragonstone, building ships and sacrificing men to shadows. The Baratheon brothers were waiting for their moment, but the North wasn't. And chaos was growing. Arya, still hiding in the streets, had become a myth to some and a menace to others. She'd killed a guard during a food raid, stabbed him right in the throat with a kitchen knife. They never found her. She wore rags, cut her hair like a boy's, and now answered only to the name Aerie. Death was becoming normal to her. In the tower, Ned's health was fading. His leg ached constantly. His eyes were heavy. He spoke less, thought more. And every night he heard the city breathing under him tense, broken, full of whispers and blood. Then came the offer. Cersei sent Varys with a new deal. "If you'll confess treason and name Joffrey as rightful king," Varys said softly, "you'll be sent to the wall. Sansa will remain in court as your penance, but you'll live." Ned stared out the window. "To live in shame and leave my daughter in a den of lions." "She's already there," Varys reminded him. That night, Ned dreamed of the Tower of Joy again, of Lyanna, of promises. The next morning he told Varys he would do it. The court was assembled in the Great Sept. The common people crowded outside the gates. Rumors had flown for days that Lord Stark was to be executed, that he would name Robb king, that he would reveal some dark secret about Joffrey's birth. Instead, he knelt and said the words they wanted to hear. I, Eddard Stark, confess to treason. I plotted against the crown. I betrayed the trust of my king. I now proclaim Joffrey Baratheon the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Cersei exhaled slowly. Tywin, watching from the balcony, remained expressionless. Sansa wept. Varys closed his eyes. But Joffrey smiled. And then, just like that day on the steps of Belar's Sept in another life, he stood up and made a decision of his own. My mother says mercy is a virtue, he said, loud enough for the crowd. But my father, King Robert, would have wanted justice. He turned to Sir Ilyn Payne. Bring me his head. And just like that, all of Ned Stark's silence, all of his bargains, all of his sacrifices, came to nothing. The sword fell, and the war began for real. The sound of Lord Eddard Stark's head striking the marble steps echoed through King's Landing like a thunderclap. The Sept of Baelor went silent, then screamed. Some people fled, others cheered, but something in the air changed forever. A shift, a fracture. And in that moment, Joffrey Baratheon became more than a boy king. He became a butcher. Cersei Lannister had screamed when he gave the order, but she did not stop it. She couldn't not fast enough. Varys tried to intercede. Too slow. Sansa collapsed, mouth open in silent horror. Sir Ilyn cleaned the sword with cloth like it was routine. And it was, to him. From a rooftop across the city, Arya Stark watched with wide eyes and a clenched jaw. She had fought through alleys, crept past guards, risked everything to reach the Sept in time. And still, she was too late. Her father was gone. All that remained was rage. The news spread through Westeros like wildfire. Robb Stark tore the message open and read it 3 times, each time hoping it might read differently. His bannermen waited for orders. Catelyn collapsed to her knees. Riverrune's river turned to grief. The North no longer wanted justice, it wanted vengeance. At Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister didn't flinch when he heard. His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed cold. He had warned Cersei, told her the Boy King was unpredictable, dangerous. But now it was done. The Lion couldn't pretend to rule through mercy anymore. Now it ruled by fear. The war escalated. Robb's army surged south with no restraint. Every Lannister camp they found, they burned. Every rider they captured, they hung. Jaime, still a prisoner, was moved further and further north. Catelyn wanted to keep him alive, but barely. The phrase "King in the North" began to echo from village to village. What had been whispered now roared. In King's Landing, the court grew darker by the hour. Sansa became a shell of herself, trapped in the lion's den with no one to protect her. Cersei tried to keep Joffrey in check, but the boy was out of control, ordering beatings, tortures, even executions without counsel. Tywin returned to the city days after Ned's death and took command of the small council. He moved like a man, building a fortress, calculating, stone-faced. He didn't punish Joffrey. He didn't scream at Cersei. He simply acted, quietly replacing guards, shifting alliances. Preparing for the long war, Varys met him in private. You've won the capital, the spider said, but you've lost the north. I never had it, Tywin replied, but soon I'll break it. Arya, meanwhile, left the city behind, disguised. Hungry, bitter, and growing colder by the day, she found a group of Night's Watch recruits heading north. She didn't trust them, but she followed. She needed to get away from the city, away from the lions, away from the steppes where her father died. She swore that one day they'd all pay, and across the narrow sea, a young woman with silver hair stared into a flame beside 3 dragon eggs, unaware that the winds in Westeros had shifted, that a great man had died, that soon fire and blood would sweep across the land again. Winter was coming, but it was coming for everyone now. Back in Winterfell, a raven arrived. The Maester opened it in front of Bran Stark, who sat quiet, broken and pale in his bed. The letter read only 2 words: "It's war." And far beyond the wall, where things older than kings and queens stirred beneath the snow, something opened its eyes. The wolves had been silenced once, but they would never be silent again.